For more on the budget cuts now and what happens tomorrow when those changes take effect, Federal News Radio's Jared Serbu joins us. So we're hearing today in the newsroom that not only are Republicans and Democrats not seriously talking about how to stop this from happening, but they can't even agree on when the sequestration takes effect. Some say it takes effect at midnight tonight. Others say it's midnight tomorrow. So obviously, it looks like sequestration is coming. What does it mean for us locally?
Well, locally, it's a little bit hard to say because you would expect the biggest impacts to come from things like acquisition, whether that's service contracting, whether that's contracting for actual products. And we don't know the outcomes of those yet. I think one thing that we do know is that most of the civilian workforce who is going to be furloughed, those 800,000 employees in the Defense Department, for example, do not live here. They live out around the country. So you could imagine a place like Huntsville, Alabama, where there's a high concentration of Army contracting and depot maintenance, which is the kind of things most DoD civilians actually do. A place like that could be hit relatively hard. The Washington, D.C. economy, obviously very dependent on defense contracting, government contracting in general. Those are things that we're going to see fold out over the next few months, I think. Remember, sequestration is not a cliff. It's more, the Army budget director yesterday described it to us as a treadmill that's going to gradually start moving faster and faster over time. So what they're doing right now is they're going to have to comb through all of their service contracts, decide which ones they can get rid of in order to save money in those crucial operating and maintenance accounts to try and preserve money for the remainder of the year. And they'll have to do the same thing on the acquisition for product side, as each and every one of those acquisition programs gets cut by 9%. Program managers are going to have to look inside their own programs and say, okay, what can I do? Can I still keep this thing alive after taking 10% of the money out of it? In some cases, the answer will probably be yes, but that will also go along with having to buy reduced quantities of that item, which will push the cost of each individual item.
Well, in the last maybe 24, 48 hours, the news cycle seems to be focused on some fiscal conservatives saying that maybe these cuts aren't so bad, and some other Republicans also pointing to the White House saying, you're the chief commander-in-chief, you're the chief executive of this government. You can decide where this money goes. The White House has pushed back saying, no, these cuts are very specific, that we can't change what's happening. So some say this is political posturing, maybe crying wolf on behalf of the Obama administration. What do we know is the fact?
Well, absent a change in law, there's pretty little flexibility about what an agency like the Defense Department or any other federal agency can do. There's some wiggle room in what's called the operation and maintenance accounts, which funds everything from civilian salaries to those service contracts we talked about before, lawn mowing on bases, lots and lots of stuff. So that's a big pot where there's flexibility to move money around. But one of the consequences of being able to have that flexibility is that the Army, for example, is going to completely protect the funds that are being used to pay for the war in Afghanistan. That shifts all the cutting back stateside. So in effect, they're not just taking a 9% cut to that O&M account. They're taking it to this smaller pie, which only amounts to about $20 billion remaining in the year. They've got to cut 18 out of that $20 billion, leaving them $1 or $2 billion to do all that stuff for the rest of the year, pay civilian salaries, cut the grass on bases, pay service contractors, pay for military health care, all of that stuff. So absent a change in law, there really is very little flexibility.
Okay, so we understand at the White House there will be a meeting between the president and congressional leaders scheduled for tomorrow. Do we expect any progress, anything to come out of that meeting? At that point, the sequestration will have taken effect, we believe.
Right, and you know, your guess is as good as mine as far as the political analysis on that goes. So I'd be hesitant to offer a prediction of any kind on that. But again, this is not a cliff. So if they were to come to a deal tomorrow, not that much would have changed. There are things that will be set in motion tomorrow. The military, for example, has been saving a lot of what it calls the irreversible changes until this day. So they've been doing things like freezing civilian hiring, which is a big deal in an organization that hires a couple thousand people a week. But the furlough notice went out to Congress last week. That starts a 45-day clock before they can actually start issuing notices to employees. Those will probably start happening in late April. So by by Memorial Day, that's probably, according to officials at DoD, when you'll actually start to see some of these impacts. So we may not. I think
the pain won't be felt right away.
That's right, and
I think scary for people who are in the federal government, who are civilian workers.
I think if you're a civilian leader in the Defense Department, one of your concerns is that as we approach the next manufactured crisis deadline on March 27th, which is when a lot of people expect maybe a sequestration would be undone in the short term, people are going to look around in Congress and say, well, this actually doesn't look that bad, because the most severe impacts will not have happened by then.
Federal News Radio's Jared Serbu, thanks for your time.
My pleasure, Mike.
Changing gears now, we want to